6 March, 1944 Berlin, Airspace Central Germany, U.S. 8th Air Force heavy bomber wings, with P-51 escort, notably 357th Fighter Group, and other 8 fighter command units versus Luftwaffe Reich Day fighters, Commanders Lieutenant Gen. James H. Doolittle, General der Jagdflieger Adolf Galland. Cloud shelf over the Havel. Contrails begin to braid. Bomber boxes hold course toward the rail yards and factories beyond the city. Crew chiefs in England have long since wiped oil from cowlings. Now the fight belongs to the pilots stepping down the bomber stream. The call is simple. In every interphone hold formation, watch for slashing attacks. And then? There they are. Long-nosed Mustangs, where German pilots do not expect to see them far past the old escort line. Still fresh, still fast, still willing to chase. Before this week, crews learned to brace for the empty sky that turned deadly at the edge of escort range. That seam used to live somewhere over the Reich, a thin, fatal zone where bombers went alone and BF 109 seconds and few 190 seconds waited. Now the seam is moving. The P-51 brings high cruise, low drag, and a fuel map. The Jagdwaffe misread. The laminar flow wing holds its promise. The Merlin under the cowl breathes at altitude. Drop tanks hang ugly under the wings and then tumble away when fight time comes. Range is not a rumour. With tanks, a P-51 can be planned for ferry legs on the order of 1650 statute miles. Listen to cockpit rhythm. Mixture boost prop radiators. The Mustang slides alongside a formation and then steps out ahead, burning some fuel now to save many lives later. German staff officers had counted miles and minutes. They had studied where Thunderbolts once turned back and where Spitfires faded. They had mapped safe assembly corridors for their fighters. The map is wrong. On this day, the first major daylight attack on Berlin by the USAAF arrives with deep cover, more than 700 heavy bombers rolling in with roughly 800 escorts. The promise implicit in range becomes pressure on the enemy. The radio traffic tightens. Calls in clipped English. Vectors from controllers. P-51 seconds push outward. German pilots see Mustangs where they expected empty air. Surprise cuts into timing, and timing is life in a slashing pass. Losses are heavy on both sides. 69 American heavy bombers do not make it home from this opening strike. 11 P-51 seconds are also lost. But the Luftwaffe bleeds fighters in numbers it cannot replace at the same clip. On 6 March, contemporary tallies include at least 64 German fighters downed in the battle. 2 days later, another raid sees 42 more German fighters lost. Sources vary upward for that first day when counting damaged or all aircraft types across the theatre, but even the conservative fighter-only counts show the trend that matters on the line. Crews in both camps feel it. Escorts are not a thin curtain anymore. They are a moving wall. Range is a design choice as much as a number. The Mustang's wing trades some forgiving behavior for drag reduction. The Merlin integration brings high-altitude performance without a supercharger compromise that would waste fuel at cruise. Hard lessons in tankage pay off paper, and metal tanks of 75108150 gallons feed first. Pilots jettison clean for combat. Every gallon carried to the right waypoint is a future circle drawn around a bomber box when it matters. The aircraft is not simply fast. It is present deep, often, and in time to meet the intercept. German fighter controllers feel the squeeze. Assembly altitudes change. Vectors lengthen. Head-on attacks that once it needs to be there often enough that the mathematics of interception tilt. The city below absorbs another day of war. The air above records a different kind of result. Escorts are staying to the target and home again. The unseen, the Luftwaffe called the deep interior a sanctuary. On 6 March 1944 it is not. Open the cowl. Read the plumbing. The Mustang's reach starts on paper drag numbers, fuel fractions, heat rejection, and ends over Germany where no one expected it. The airframe is not magic. It is a series of hard choices made to serve range first, everything else second. The wing is the first choice. A laminar flow planform with a thickened low-drag section holds lift at cruise while smoothing pressure over most of the chord. Less profile drag means fewer pounds of fuel burned per mile. At high altitude, the payoff multiplies. The Mustang carries speed without drinking the tanks dry. Handling quirks exist, stalls bite if mishandled, but the trade favors distance. Under the spinner, the Packard-built Merlin, with a 2-stage 2-speed supercharger, turns range from brochure into reality. The blower holds manifold pressure at height, so cruise power can sit low while true airspeed stays high. That is the quiet trick, high TAS on. Not free energy, just a careful bargain that earns more miles per gallon. Fuel is the story's spine. Internal capacity grows across blocks. Early combat Mustangs carry wing fuel for the trip out and back. Then comes the fuselage tank behind the pilot, roughly 85 gallons, that changes the map. Center of gravity shifts aft as that tank sits full. Pilots learn the drill. Burn the rear tank first to around 25 gallons before mixing it with the wings, or the airplane gets twitchy in pitch when fighting. Range asks for discipline, a sequence, not a guess. External tanks are the loud part. Under each wing hangs expendable distance, 75-gallon metal, 108-gallon paper, occasionally 150-gallon metal for ferries. Paper tanks are cheap and plentiful. They weep a little fuel and are not loved on the ground, but in the air they buy time. Escort Pro. When the first contrails of a fight appear, the toggles click both tanks off, and the Mustang cleans up in seconds. Now the same airframe that went far can turn, dive and fire without hoses and drag hanging below. Numbers matter because pilots plan to numbers, not hopes. Ferry range with maximum tankage pushes past 1,600 miles in calm air at economical settings, a delivery profile, not a duel. Escort radius is a different arithmetic. Winds climb, assemble, weave combat allowance, and a reserve to get home to a secondary field, if the primary goes black. With two 108-gallon tanks and smart fuel management, the Mustang's practical escort radius stretches to Berlin from English bases and leaves time to fight. That is the operational hinge. The Luftwaffe expected handoff lines to fall short of the capital. They did not. Range alone does not keep a bomber box alive. The fighter must be present at the right minutes. That is scheduling and speed. The Mustang cruises efficiently at altitude, 7-8 miles a minute, while sipping relative to other types, so a controller or group leader can place cover exactly on climb. Each dash is a small tax on the day's fuel plan. Add enough margin and the taxes do not bankrupt the mission. Jettison technique is its own craft. Drop too late, and the first merge is flown dirty. Drop too early, and the formation loses. The cockpit routine is a metronome, mixture set for altitude, prop governing for cruise, then pulled forward for fight, coolant and oil shutters trimmed to keep drag down without cooking the engine. Each small trim is a foot of fuel saved here, another there. A long escort day is thousands of those decisions. The result is presence, the one variable German staff officers could not assign a safe value to anymore. On the ground, logistics makes range repeatable instead of a one-off record. Factories send a river of tanks, hoses, pumps. Depots swap tired engines before they hemorrhage time on the line. Airfields stock the right grades of fuel in the right bladders at the right dispersals. Briefings update winds aloft, so cruise settings match the day. Range is a system, not a single number in a brochure. And intent sits over all of it. Commanders choose range as the metric that wins, not the last knot of top speed, not the last turn of climb. The goal is to escort to target, remain on station when the ambush usually comes, and still have the legs to cover the withdrawal, then do it again tomorrow. The Mustang slots into that intent perfectly. The airplane does not erase danger, it erases the window of German choice. So when a staffel forms for a head on the clock they are used to is wrong. When a swarm tries to climb to reset the regrouping arcs over friendly flak are safe. Head-on attacks can be set up without long-range fighters diving through the merge. Those maps die in minutes. Controllers watch scopes and hear the reports. Mustangs over the climb lanes, Mustangs over the assembly orbits, Mustangs still there after the bombs. Berlin defense sectors scramble Bf 109Gs and FDBU 190 as into the pale spring sun. The plan is textbook: build altitude ahead of the stream. Time the slashing passes, reset under the flak umbrella, repeat. It works when the bombers arrive unescorted at the edge, it fails when the edge moves. A swarm eases in for a front quarter run, contrails cross at impossible angles, a P-51 slides out of the weave and turns the pass into a chase. German pilots key their mics with clipped startled calls, citing long-range escorts where the day's fuel plan said none should be. The shock is not just speed, it is endurance. After the first melee, the Mustangs do not vanish. They reappear on the withdrawal routes on the cut points, where twin-engine German tactics strain under the new math. Head-on passes remain lethal, but the setup windows shrink. Climbing turns that once brought a staffel back on top of a formation now end with a glint below and behind radiator scoop, sliding canopy, the Mustang's silhouette, catching up even after a long, patient weave. The fallback to flak-covered reset points becomes dangerous. Escorts lurk outside the belts to catch anyone who pops out low and fast. The rhythm of intercept attack, reset attack decays into singles and pairs. Psychology moves as quickly as the presence means the escort war is no longer a thin shield at the front of the stream. It is a moving column of risk from coast to target and back. The first spring raids make the lesson painfully specific. A bomber box that would have been naked over the capital a month earlier now carries cover to the initial point through the bomb run and into the turnoff. Twin-engined fighters circling to time a mass slash are broken before they gather. Single-engined cover flights rushing in from the flanks find Mustangs already on station, already fast, already willing to dive past the bombers to force the merge. The Luftwaffe's deep fields, those tidy dispersals ringing central Germany, hear the new pattern on their tower frequencies, scramble, orders, contact reports, then more calls about escorts persisting where they did not belong. No one pretends the Mustangs make the bombers invulnerable. Gunners still fight for every second on a head-on run. Crews still count, flak bursts and holes. But the escort's reach drags the loss curves in a different direction. When daylight raids first pushed past the old cover line, interceptions could be scripted. Mass/reset intercepts arrive piecemeal, timing breaks, units land with scattered fuel states and shaken nerves. Controllers spend more minutes moving pieces just to avoid the hunters rather than to kill the prey. Confidence erodes at the edges first. The young pilot who once believed the climb and reset would always buy him another chance starts to hedge a shallower climb, a longer look over the shoulder. The veteran who once chose the boldest vector to cut the stream now accepts a lesser angle rather than risk a chase. These are small decisions, but air battles are made of thousands of small decisions taken at high speed with little oxygen in the brain. The Mustangs reach taxes that decision-making every minute it remains on station. By mid-March, the tallies tell their own story. In the opening Berlin raid, German fighter losses mount despite fierce resistance. Within 48 hours, another deep strike piles on. Across those first deep encounters, the running total for destroyed fighters pushes toward the 8 dozen mark. When the claims from separate days are added up, not a single day's miracle, but a sustained bleed across repeated missions. Even when conservative filters trim over claim, the directional truth holds deep escort turns, planned intercepts into costly improvisation. Debriefs on the German side grow more technical and more fatalistic at once. Pilots ask for revised assembly, points, earlier vectors, steeper climbs, more fuel, anything to reopen a window of initiative. Staff officers play the map game with new lines that simply move the problem deeper into Germany. Oil training hours and replacement rates answer those requests with silence. The escort war is becoming a logistics war conducted at fighter speed. On the American side, the tone hardens into routine. Briefings emphasize tank sequence, jettison discipline, and the weave geometry that protects the bombers without burning the day's margin. The promise to the crews is not in. That is how a number on a planning chart becomes a weapon that reaches into doctrine and shakes it. 1,600 plus miles is not a headline, it is a clock that refuses to run out when the defender most needs it to. The Luftwaffe's unprepared nightmare is not the first sight of a Mustang deep over Germany. It is the second sighting an hour later when the same airplane is still there. Numbers arrive cold. They stack on blotters, chalkboards, and debrief sheets. They do not shout. They just remove options. Start with the week that broke assumptions. The first daylight blow against Berlin escorts present to target and beyond. Bomber losses are grim, but fighter tallies on the German side climb in a way that changes staff voices. Add the follow-on strike 48 hours later. Add the running contacts along withdrawal routes. The sum bends toward a hard figure, roughly 80 German fighters destroyed across those deep encounters, when you collect separate day totals into one operational picture. It is not a single thunderclap. It is accumulation. Why that number matters is simple. Fighter defense is a rate game. Lose a handful and the roster stretches. Lose dozens twice in 1 week, and you pull green replacements into cockpits that demand experience the syllabus did not have time to give. Then those replacements meet escorts that do not run out of fuel at the old edge. The curve steepens. Claims are never clean. Overclaim exists because airmen fight at speed inside clouds and contrails and shock. Conservative counts cut the spikes down. Yet even after the trimming, the trend holds deep escort converts planned mass attacks into scattered expensive tries. The Luftwaffe bleeds in detail. Each scrap chews a few more names off a roster board that was not long to begin with. Look at how the arithmetic builds in minutes. Escort radius buys presence at the initial point. Presence at the IP buys cover through bombs away. Cover through bombs away buys time to smash the classic head-on reset cycle. Once that cycle breaks, the defender spends fuel and altitude on reassembly, and that is when Mustangs arrive again, not as abort signals sent because the window closed while a unit tried to avoid the hunters. Numbers hide those moments until you read the pattern that creates them. Case studies nail it down. A mass of single-engined fighters tries for a front-quarter attack. Escorts already occupy the altitude gate. The first element peels to avoid a merge and falls into a chase it cannot shake. Deeper still, latecomers try to climb under flak cover to catch the withdrawal and find P-51 seconds waiting in the cold light above the belts. None of those scenes is decisive alone. Together, they make the week feel different on every radio net in central Germany. There is a second number that matters: time on station. An escort that can remain during the bomb run and still loiter for withdrawal multiplies its chance to turn encounters into confirmed losses. The weave itself costs fuel, so do chases, so does every quick dive to split a forming attack. A fighter that can pay those taxes and still land with reserves turns a thin shield into a moving wall. That is how 80 grows from skirmishes, not from legend. Pressure works on planners too. Controllers tighten vectors, assembly points shift. Now fold morale into the ledger. Young pilots return with shorter stories, not the rolling confident accounts of /reset/, but clipped notes about escorts that did not go away. Veterans begin to husband energy rather than stretch for the perfect cut. Leaders alter risk calculus in small ways that ripple through formations. The bombers are not safe, but the defenders are less certain. A few seconds, those seconds turn into more names on the week's list. On the American side, the language changes from promise to practice. Fuel sequence briefings become muscle memory. Jettison discipline becomes reflex. Group commanders talk less about if they will reach the target with cover and more about where to position the spare fuel they kept for the withdrawal gate. When a box calls, someone still has legs. That is range becoming policy. Strip the myth from the math. The P-51 does not erase losses. It does not end the war in a day. What it does when managed tank by tank and minute by minute is maintain presence where the defender most needs absence. The numbers reflect that presence raids that keep their shape interceptors that lose their. So, when you read a figure like 80 fighters lost across the first deep encounters, do not imagine a single meadow of wrecks. Imagine a week where timing fails again and again here at the IP, there on the reset, later on the withdrawal, and each failure costs an airframe, a pilot, a unit's nerve. That is how a range line on a planning chart becomes pressure on a nation's air defense. The ledger keeps turning. Each mission adds or subtracts a few more. The question for a defender becomes brutal and narrow. Can you trade at that rate and still stand next month? The escorts, by being present, force that question every day the weather opens and the bombers launch. The answer will not be found in a single headline. It will be written in weekly totals that look too much like this one. The week ends, but the clock it started keeps running. Range has proven itself where it matters at the merge at the turn on the way home. That proof does not arrive as a slogan. It arrives as schedules, load plans, and briefings that no longer hedge. Commanders plan on presence. Pilots fly to presence. Opponents fear presence. Deep escort hardens into a system. Tank sequencing becomes ritual. Paper and metal hangars, stockpiles of 108 seconds and 150 seconds like ammunition. Maintenance crews measure time in fuel hoses and safety wires. Weather officers build wind tables. The Mustang is the instrument, but the score is written by the planners who now know that range is the lever that moves a day's outcome. Doctrine shifts without speeches. The escort is no longer a forward screen that fades near the target. It is an envelope, elastic, enduring. Weave patterns are tuned to waste seconds for the attacker while burning inches of fuel at a rate the airframe can pay. That quiet certainty, fuel in hand, minutes to spend, changes how formations fly and how enemies decide. The Luftwaffe's counters struggle against that certainty. Earlier vectors cannot gift more gasoline to tired engines. It is relentless on the calendar. Inside cockpits, the legacy feels practical. Pilots trust the map again. They know the escort will still be there when the bomb run ends. They know a call on withdrawal is not a plea tossed into empty air. Confidence changes, spacing, scanning gunnery. It does not make anyone safe. Small advantages multiplied over hours become losses. avoided the kind of arithmetic that never makes a poster, but wins a week then another. The enemy feels the mirror image. Endurance on the other side turns every setup into a race against a clock that does not run out. A Staffel commander, once free to choose the perfect vector, now burns attention, watching for escorts outside. Industry ties it all down. Range without replacement is a stunt. Range with factories behind it is policy. Tanks replaced as fast as they are jettisoned. Engines swapped before weak hours harden into failures. Airfields ready with the grades and carts to turn a long leg day into another launch at dawn. The airplane earned its reputation. The system made it repeatable. That is why the shape of the air war bends, not in a single day, not with a single mission, but with the steady pressure of presence extended deep and often. The idea outlives the airframe. Long-range escort becomes a habit in planning rooms. Later generations will use tankers instead of paper tanks, radars instead of eyeballed weaved geometry networks instead of chalkboards. The principle does not change. Reach the fight with fuel to spare. Remain while the critical minutes pass. Deny the opponent safe setup and safe exit. Escort. The narrative often tries to crown a machine as a miracle. The record on these pages argues for something colder and more useful. A good airframe married to a better plan, fed by logistics that do not miss, flown by crews drilled to the minute. Range is the thread that lets all of that pull together. Cut the thread, and the pattern unravels back to brittle raids and predictable seams. Keep it intact, and even fierce defenders are forced into expensive improvisation. So the legacy is not a headline about destiny. It is the sight of contrails that do not peel away at the old line. It is the dull thud of drop tanks hitting frozen fields far inside hostile airspace. It is the quiet in a bomber cockpit when the turn is complete and the escort is still there. It is the way planners now think about any future raid. Start with fuel, buy time, spend minutes, break scripts, presence as a weapon. Look again at the map that opened this story. Those old red arcs, the ones that marked where escorts must turn back, are gone. In their place sit corridors of minutes that reach to the center of the board and back out again. That is what 1,600+ miles meant when managed with discipline and backed by a system, not a promise to win by itself, but a guarantee to be there when winning becomes possible. This is how the long-range predator leaves the stage, not with a flourish, with a procedure. Tanks on, tanks off. Crews set, prop forward. Weave, chase, return. Tomorrow repeat. The defender can answer with bravery and skill. He cannot answer with time he does not have. That in the